You are watching the press preview, first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the CEO of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Eye has the headline, "Free after 48 days." Picturing just a small handful of the hostages released by Hamas as part of the agreed prisoner swap. The Times declares, at last, freedom for some. The Mirror has a nearly identical headline. The Financial Times says a truce has taken hold in Gaza. The Guardian describes the war as having been paused. And according to The Telegraph, the chief executive of Comic Relief has resigned after disagreeing with the charity's stance that there should be a ceasefire in Gaza. Away from matters in the Middle East, the Mail calls for the end of the freeze on personal income tax thresholds, which the paper brands a stealth tax. The Express speaks to the broadcaster and campaigner Dame Esther Rantzen as she undergoes treatment for cancer. And in a week when the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, was forced to deny swearing about the town of Stockton-on-Tees in Parliament, The Star calls it a Garden of Eden. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Mark Wallace and Zoe Williams. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the front page of The Eye. And the headline there, "Free after 48 days." Pictured there, some of the Israeli hostages being released. A good news day, but reservations because there are still many more people who are being kept hostage.
There are reservations from literally every side, including all kind of external agencies. A lot of... the ceasefire is only 4 days. The hostage swap obviously has left a lot of people, a lot of Israeli hostages still in Gaza. The release of Palestinian prisoners has obviously reignited an absolute furore over the way Israel in particular treats child defendants. They've been censured internationally for trying children without their parents present and without them being able to understand the language in which they're being tried. So actually, there's a huge amount of very difficult further conversations to have. Nevertheless, obviously it's a breakthrough. Obviously it signals a change in tack. Obviously, I say obviously, but I would be surprised if it didn't result in either a longer than 4-day ceasefire or more ceasefires down the road.
Yeah, and that's the hope that it will be a permanent ceasefire. Certainly those are the soundings that are coming out from the region.
And particularly a hope, obviously, as you say, Zoe, it's a 4-day agreement. Israel said that it's willing to extend it day by day based on continuing release. And I think it's obviously, as they've said, but not the only major goal of their operation in Gaza and operation since the atrocities of the 7th of October has been to secure the release of these hostages.
But they have also said that once the ceasefire, however long it will be extended for, is over, they are going to continue the war.
Yes, and you can see Benjamin Netanyahu's comments today were that securing the release of hostages is one of the goals, but they intend to fulfil what he refers to as all the goals of their operation. That does, of course, include what they've stated to be the destruction of Hamas militarily. But before that, I think you're absolutely right. The first thing to focus on is these people, 48 days after being snatched from their homes amid unspeakable atrocities around them. Goodness knows what some of them may have suffered and experienced since that time. Elderly people, unwell people, small children. The relief for their families that they are free, the angst for the families of the 200 or so further hostages. We still don't know exactly who and how many people are being held because Hamas and others haven't said. One of the hostages released today is reported to have been allegedly claimed to have been dead a few days ago by Islamic Jihad. And so the angst of those who are the loved ones of those who have not yet been released continues.
There is something, isn't there, in the because Netanyahu has really come under fire from families precisely because the first 3 weeks of the fighting, he did not seem like he was movable on this. He did not seem like he was open to a hostage swap. He did not seem like he was open to any kind of ceasefire in the service of a hostage swap. So it is worth wondering whether this doesn't signal something either in regards to his mindset or in regards to his strength within his own cabinet.
I mean, I think a couple of things we don't know. We don't know how long these negotiations have been going on. For obvious reasons, they're not conducted in public. So it could be that they're extremely recent. It could be that they've been longer running. We do know from, and I think it was in the VT, the report earlier, that the preparations to receive released hostages have been put in place over quite some time preceding this. It's undoubtedly the case that within Israel, the political environment has shifted, and actually there has been a growing movement around the families of hostages. There is, of course, also an existing voice, rightly so, within Israel for the victims of Israeli victims of terrorism in previous years, some of whom are understandably very concerned to see people convicted of terrorist offences being released in return for this kind of exchange.
But that isn't the main opposition to.
But that's in the mix too. What I'm saying is
it's in the mix. But I mean, whether you look at the pressure Netanyahu's under, he's under pressure from the centre, and he's under pressure from the centre of his own political environment, and anything to the left of the centre has been putting him under pressure for a long time. So. I think what this signals is not that there's this kind of, side voice about what to do about previous conflicts. I think it signals that his strength in his own agenda, which was very much not hostage-focused at the start, you will recall, he actively said he didn't want to talk about the hostages in kind of key discussions. And
some of the families reported in the papers today that exactly that he didn't want to talk about the hostages, and it didn't seem to be his focus. His focus was to wage war, and they felt that they weren't being listened to. Let's look at the Times to talk about what we saw in the West Bank and thousands of Palestinians gathering outside the Offa military prison. That's to witness the release of Palestinian prisoners. Yes, and I think actually, this image that's so bold and so clear on the front page of the Times underscores a little bit what we were just saying. This is a picture of armed and masked men escorting elderly people and vulnerable children. But I do think it's quite important. I don't think all the coverage so far of this deal and this exchange has fully reflected. I think some of it's become too close to risking the idea of equivalence between who is being released by Hamas, innocent civilians, and who's being released by the Israelis. Some, but not. I completely agree with you about the criticisms of the Israeli handling, particularly of some child internees. But some of those who are being released who are convicted of things like stabbing attacks, petrol bombings, and so on, I think it's really important that we make clear there isn't an equivalence between who's being sought. This isn't Hamas releases hostages, Israel releases hostages. And so it is important that we make that clear. And put in that light, it is troubling, I think, in some ways, to see crowds celebrating the return of people who were in prison in Israel for example, stabbing police officers.
Come on, the girl you're talking about who stabbed a police officer,
Sorry, is that a quote mark?
It's a quote mark because she was tried, and this is actually a matter of public record, she was tried not understanding what the process was. The idea that you could convict somebody when they don't understand the language they're being tried in is ridiculous.
Just to be completely clear, the quote marks mean you're disputing that people who've been released are...
I'm disputing that you can call somebody guilty when the terms of their trial
So you're disputing the person who stabbed a police officer, the person who did an attempted stabbing attack, the arson attack, the lady who exploded a gas canister.
She wasn't tried as a child, right? And she was a child when that crime was committed, and she didn't understand the procedure, so she couldn't. There is no way of calling that due process. Now, obviously, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened, but I can't look at that and say, that person is definitely did stab a policeman or definitely was convicted correctly. If the actual due process in the trial of a child isn't upheld, which it hasn't been.
I mean, I think it's difficult to debate when we don't know the detail.
That's what justice is for,
Which is why, to go back to what I was just saying, if you have a crowd of people who believe they are welcoming home people who are they are treating as heroes because they believe they have attacked Israeli citizens.
They're
That's a problem,
No,
isn't it?
they're
That's troubling,
welcoming them
right?
because they were imprisoned as children and they missed them and they didn't know why they were imprisoned.
I mean, they did
generally
know why,
speaking.
but
No,
you're
they
just
genuinely didn't.
disputing that
No,
they're...
Mark, honestly, there are international agencies who have called into question so many child convictions in Israel that this is a real thing. It's
I
not
find
just-
it troubling
they
if
weren't
a crowd-
all children that were released.
No,
Some of
no,
them
no.
were adult women. And it's something that the IDF wanted to stop, as you say, that the celebratory mood. That's something that they banned, but obviously was completely ignored.
Well, I mean, if you're... from a Gazan point of view, if you're going to get bombed anyway and then somebody says, don't cheer, I don't see what... I think the sort of... what Israel might do next from a Gazan point of view is so unknowable, and so the proportion of it is so unknowable that I doubt very much that they could have much say over how people behave in a crowd.
On this, we agree. I don't think. Okay. I think the likelihood of Gazans or indeed residents of the West Bank following IDF orders about what to say and do is extremely low. I'm still troubled by what appears to me to be lionisation and celebration of people who've done really bad things.
Nobody's lionising terrorists. That's ridiculous.
I mean, Hamas have essentially a cult of lionising terrorists.
Hamas
certainly.
are terrorists, so they are lionising terrorists. But, like, you know...
There is a major cult of lionising terrorists.
You're making no attempt at all to say, if somebody celebrates when their teenager comes back from a prison sentence, which they thought unjust to begin with, and many impartial observers agreed with them, I think you're pushing the point to say that that's wrong for them to look happy.
Well, I'm sceptical that every member of the crowd was a parent.
I think you're not going to agree on this. We can't go into the minutiae of the legal system and whether those that were found guilty were actually guilty. That's not our place to do that here. Let's look at the FT weekend and the fact that this truce is ongoing, really looking at the likelihood of will it last. I mean, so far it's gone according to textbook. It's amazing. It's been absolutely, completely smooth.
And I think this shows a number of different... I mean, firstly, mercifully, it's begun as it's begun, and I very much hope it continues. I hope it holds and it succeeds in seeing the release of the hostages and continuing beyond those 4 days, as I say. It says a number of different things. It certainly does say something about the political pressure that Netanyahu is under. It says something about the rightful importance that Israeli society places on seeing these hostages return. It also says something about the pressure that Hamas, in particular, is feeling from the Israeli campaign, because that, the expectation was there was a lot of speculation that this was all part of a cunning ploy to enmesh the IDF in Gaza City, and then Hezbollah, I think Ali Bunkel was saying Hezbollah would swoop in, the Iranians would get it was part of a grand plan. Now seems Hamas made a variety of very severe miscalculations, and it has been brought to the table as well. I don't think Hamas was...
It depends what you think their calculation was, right? I mean, the American intelligence of their calculation was that they were intending, they had this kind of necropolitical disregard for the lives on either side, and they were intending to provoke a disproportionate Israeli response, and so they've succeeded.
And Mark, we're going to have to leave it there for the break. Much more coming up afterwards. But in the meantime, the Mail calls for an end for the freeze on personal tax thresholds. We'll be discussing that next. Do stay with us. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Mark Wallace and Zoe Williams, taking us through the papers this evening. Let's have a look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph and this story about the comic relief chief who's quit his position. This is Eric Salama, I think that's how you pronounce it. He's left, allegedly over comic relief taking a stance on calling for a ceasefire. What more detail do we know about this story?
So, basically, Comic Relief signed an open letter calling for a ceasefire, which many charities and other agencies were signing at the time. They apparently did not consult the board, which is what Eric Salama has resigned over. It's surprising to me because he was due to exit in March 2024 anyway, so resigning prematurely over a governance issue, which won't be his problem in a couple of months, seems to signal a very great state of agitation. And on that, I'm surprised that Comic Relief didn't anticipate and therefore discuss that would have been the case. But Mark is less surprised than me. He thinks that's normal.
I suppose it's certainly a bit easier to resign when you're stepping down a few months later, right?
Yeah, but would you, though?
I think on the governance thing, if you're on the board of a charity, it comes with really, really serious responsibilities and some really serious risks if it's done wrong. But it may also be a question of personal opinion. That's not entirely clear. But
he's saying he's taking this. He's stepping down because management took an approach to an issue which I thought was profoundly wrong and which I could not live with.
Yeah, and I think I do think it's a valid interpretation to say that signing this statement, but as far as I'm aware, Comic Relief has never called for Hamas to stop its regular firing of missiles in peacetime prior to... But that is taking sides to some degree, isn't it? It risks seeming to be political,
I honestly think that, you know, Comic Relief... The calling for a ceasefire has been quite widespread. It's been the UN line for at least 2.5 weeks.
The United Nations has said a variety of somewhat dubious things.
Honestly, if you look at the UN, if you look at the UNHCWR...
But from what we read, that's what he was disagreeing with.
It's not like this is uncontroversial. I mean, the Labour Party's been riven over the issue, for example.
One of
my own local councillors has basically been either resigned or chucked out of the Conservative Party in an argument about it.
The fact that British politics manages to tie its neck in a twist about it.
It's not just British politics that's riven over this, I think.
But it is not that controversial for a charity which is predominantly a children's charity.
There is disagreement over those that have called for a ceasefire and those that haven't. Just very quickly, the Mail story, just take us through that very quickly. We want to end the stealth tax. Mark.
So this is really, really interesting. Obviously, this is coming a couple of days after the autumn statement. One of the big criticisms, this was a criticism of Gordon Brown for many years, rightly. It's been a criticism of the Conservatives, particularly of Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt. The idea of fiscal drag. So you keep tax rates down, but you keep thresholds the same while wages rise. More people get caught in higher rates. And effectively, by a stealth tax, the Conservatives used to oppose this when Gordon Brown did it. They've come in for a lot of stick over continuing to do it. And now they're saying, well, maybe in the budget in the spring or maybe in a manifesto in the spring, we might be willing to undo this if you vote for us.
Mark,
I would argue belated, but it shows that it's hurting.
Mark, must leave it there. And Zoe, thank you